when it comes to oppression, you know, people view it differently. There are individuals who don't even think oppression exists. They think it is a make-believe, that, you know, it is all in your head. And maybe sometimes it is in people's head. But the fact of the matter is, it is part of the American fabric, what makes this country what it is. And we need to have the conversation. That it is not too late to have the conversation. It is important that we have the conversation, because now we live in this interracial world. If we don't have the conversation, then it's just gonna get brushed on, and it's never going to be acknowledged and addressed. And I recognize that this conversation is very uncomfortable, right? It's okay because maybe my white friends or my white colleagues never talk to me about this topic. And I want to invite you to talk to me about it. But for the most part, I hope that if you are a listener and you are not in the people of color group, that you receive this in good faith and recognize that we are not asking to be treated different. We are asking for compassion, for empathy, and for understanding. And to recognize that our world that we live in, Black people, the world that we live in, we are faced with a lot of challenges, whether it's blatant in our face, whether it's micro, whether it's hidden, that there's a lot that we go through that as a result really end up manifesting in a physical ailments that we see that we are disproportionately dealt with. And hence why you see a lot of statistics where Black people are at the forefront. You know, COVID is a prime example. If nothing came to taught us a lesson, COVID has really unveiled the truth about healthcare disparity and how marginalized communities have been affected in the worst way. So when you are listening to this conversation, I hope that you will dig deeper with your own circle of friends, internalize this conversation and ask yourself, did any of this conversation made you uncomfortable? And if it did made you uncomfortable in any way, then reach out to that Black friend of yours, that Black brother, sister, whoever, co-worker, colleagues of yours, and engage in a conversation. Tap into their experience and listen to them. Just listen. If you have nothing to do, listen and put yourself in their position and ask yourself, if you had to walk in their shoes and you have to live their experience, what effects do you think it will have on both your physical, your emotional, and even your career?
This is Chat Over Popcorn, brought to you by Aspire Media and Marketing, hosted by Angela Ansa. Subscribe to our social media networks and follow the conversations on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Chat Over Popcorn, where the conversations run deep, starts now.
Welcome to Chat Over Popcorn, where the conversations run deep. My name is Angela Ansa, your host for the show. Tonight we are going to be having a very hard, uncomfortable, but much needed conversation on oppression, racism, social injustice, and the effects that it has on individuals' emotional wellness, career, and financial wellness as well. Joining me to discuss this very hard conversation is Naisha Rivera. Naisha is a public health professional and a licensed social worker. She is also a transformational leader who believes in bringing out the best in people and bringing out the leadership in individuals. Naisha, welcome to Chat Over Popcorn.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to join you in this conversation today. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I really do hope that the viewers today will relate to some of the things that we're talking about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. When we talk about the emotional components, you know, individuals who may not have experienced the overt oppression where it is in your face, you see it, but then it comes in the form of micro aggression. subconsciously, you can internalize it, and then the effects that it has on your emotional well-being. I want us to talk more about that. So let's talk about, you and I are both people of color. So one way or the other, we may have experienced some type of microaggression, whether it is in the workplace, whether it is just out in the community, right, going about your business. When you are dealt with microaggression, you have your career to think about, right? And so oftentimes you cannot be yourself. You cannot be your authentic self because there is an image you are dealing with. The stereotype of being a black person and having to conform in the workplace so that you do not hinder your career mobility or advancement, which in essence and in return would have an effect on your financial wellness.
Right. So in hearing you say that, all I could hear is that is the exact art of oppression, to make us think that we have to, in a way, kind of go along to get along, right? Mm-hmm. That we have to silence our voice, dull our sparkle in order to be able to get ahead. And for me, I think a part of us being able to rise above oppression is recognizing that that is not true, right? So it's speak up or be spoken for. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times in our workplaces, we feel like I can't say anything, especially if I'm frustrated or if I'm angry about systems and policies that are in place, because if I do, I'm speaking as a black woman, I'm going to be perceived as the angry black woman. We know, we've all heard that one thrown mm-hmm. around so frequently, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So why is it that my white colleague can be upset and she's just upset, right? So now we rush in and we're like, oh, how can we make things better? But when it's a person of color, it's angry black woman, right. If it's a black woman, you mm-hmm. know? And so what I part of this conversation, because as people of color, as black people specifically, we have to start having these conversations to really undo some of that learning that we have been taught, because our parents may have taught us that, because based on the generation they were in, it was survival mode, right? So you go in there, keep your head down, do your job, get paid, and leave. Mm-hmm. But really, we're in a different day and age where it's important for us to be making our voices heard. And so now how you do that, I think, is the important part, because if we are coming out and we're not able to deliver our message in a way that can be well received, well, then we get nowhere. Right? So I think being able to be strategic in how we express our frustration, how we express our anger is where it's at.
Right? You think about the fact that it's healthy to express emotions, and suppressed emotions have health consequences. As human beings, we are going to offend each other. We are going to step on each other's toe. We are not always going to get along. Heck, married people don't always get along, right? So when you are in a workplace, as long as you are interacting with someone of different culture, of different beliefs, different values, you are going to ruffle each other's feathers. And when the workplace is not conducive to do that, and you are suppressing these emotions, then you are risking predisposing yourself to these health conditions. You and I both have public health background, and we can even spend all day talking about just what that could look like. So I think as a society, as a community, it's about hard time that we allow people of color, allow anybody for that matter, to be able to express themselves without any dire consequences, especially without being blacklisted where your career advancements may be threatened.
Absolutely. And you know, something that I think about, for me, it's all about changing our mindset, a shift in mindset, and understanding that, okay, so if you think about previous generations before us, it was, I get this one job and I want to stay with this company, move up through this company, and I'm going to retire from this company. That's not the day and age that we live in now, mm-hmm. right? And so for me, as a millennial coming into the workforce, I had an understanding that I am who I am. I'm not going to dull my sparkle for anyone else. And so what does that mean? So clearly you can see me, I wear my hair in its natural state, right? And so for me, I remember when I was, yeah, I see you rocking your fro too. So when I was preparing to go on interviews, this was like back in 2012, I remember seeing all these videos of natural hair women and saying, here are professional styles for your natural hair for the workplace. And for me, I said, well, what is unprofessional about my hair, right? So if I want to wear it in a puff or I want to wear it out in a fro, who says that's not professional? So I have to slick my hair back. I don't gel my hair, I don't slick my hair back. So if I'm going to be authentically me, I'm going to show up with my fro or I'm going to show up with my puff, which represents me. And so what I had to understand was not every workplace was going to be for me. And that's okay, because if they want me to come here and be someone other than who I am, then that's not the place for me. And this is why I think it's important for us to be having these kinds of conversations to help people understand that we don't have to just go along with what the white standards of beauty are, or kind of mold ourselves to fit what someone else thinks is appropriate, when really there are so many different spaces that would embrace you for exactly who you are. So it's a matter of being able to connect yourself with those types of spaces rather than being in a space that doesn't really care for you to be there anyway if you're having to dull who you are. And so I think that that's a really important part of this as well, because really, as we're shifting what it looks like to be people of color in the workplace, if we're going to speak up and we're going to be authentically who we are, that's all of who we are, right? So if I feel like I can't even look how I want to look, how am I going to speak up how I want to speak up? How am I going to show up in these spaces as authentically me? It's all one package. It comes together, you know? So I think that that's really important. And I think even us both sitting here as Black women, rocking our natural hair, having this kind of conversation is a perfect example that people need to see.
So you talk about you going for a job interview and looking to make sure you present yourself in the best possible light so you can land this job. And, you know, of course, if you're going for a job interview, you want to look your best. Look your best in the sense of the clothing that you are wearing, your shoes, how you present yourself. But to have to change your hair, that alone, that is a whole element you are adding to it. But it goes back to making sure that as a society, we do our very best to have people who are of different race and ethnicity be at the other end of the table, holding the discussion and doing the interview process, so that people who are now trying to enter into the workforce can see these role models and not feel like they need to dull down their authentic self. Besides just putting people in these strategic places to model after, what else can we do as a society to make sure that we push through the microaggression, that while we know these things exist, and quite frankly, you know, people that say they don't see color, let's be real, you do see color. If you tell me you don't see color, you make me nervous. You make me very uncomfortable, because how can you not see color?
Right. I'm so happy that you mentioned that about not seeing color, right? Because people say it and it sounds like, oh, it's the thing to say, that's a sweet thing because we all see each other as being the same. But the fact of the matter is, we all do see color. And this came up recently in my workplace because we took on this huge diversity, equity, and inclusion project, right? We hired a consultant and everything, and we're talking, and it was coming up for a lot of people, like, why do we keep talking about race? And it's the huge elephant in the room that no one generally wants to talk about, but it's a huge part of what keeps in place the issues around hierarchy and things of that nature. And so I had one colleague, actually a person of color, say, I don't see color. And so for me, number one, I know that that is a way that this person is internalizing racial oppression, right? And for me, I had to say in that moment, I'm like, well, listen, for me, if you don't see color, then you don't see me. Because first thing, I'm a Black woman, right? So if you don't see me as a Black woman, then you don't see me. And I think that that's really important for us as people of color to stand strong on that, right? Because when we go into our workplaces, when we go anywhere, what do people see first? They don't see the degrees, they don't see the licenses, they don't see the years of experience. They see how we look on the outside, right? And so if I'm gonna be authentically me, I'm showing up as Black woman Nyesha, and yes, I have all the other things that I'm bringing to the table, but I need you to embrace me as a Black woman first. Not embrace my degrees and my licensure, my experience, that kind of thing, but separate my Blackness from it. No, it's all one package. But I also think helping to demystify some of what it takes to really succeed, because sometimes it feels like this is so beyond me, or only certain types of people of color, or only certain types of Black people can do this, right? So people with specific degrees, people with specific connections, but really you talked about privilege. And I think things are only privileged because we allow them to be privileged. If we take the time to share what we've learned, right? So you didn't start out in a director role, neither did I, right? I started at entry level. And so learning what did it take for me to get there, and now don't just hold that to the chest, but now being free to share that with other women of color, other people of color who are coming in, and also ensuring that they have room at the table and making sure that they get the seat at the table, I think is a really important part of it. And helping people to understand, like, you do have choice. You don't have to take whatever is given to you, and here's how you can do that. So I think that that's a huge part of it. And I think it's something that is often overlooked. And that's why folks think, well, I just have to take this kind of job. So maybe I have only obtained my high school diploma and I haven't gone to college. So all I can do is what I've seen. When really there are so many opportunities, but if people don't know about the opportunities, how will they ever be able to make use of them?
Sometimes I wonder, when these conversations are taking place, how do the white folks feel? And we all have white friends, and we love them to death, and we know they are of different generations. So we shouldn't hold them to both ancestors from black people and white people went through many years ago. But nonetheless, the individuals that lived through those eras are still around. Some of them are still very much alive and gave birth and raised these children. And so the way you raise them, somehow, if you do not do a good job, can manifest into them, if not practicing overt racism, practice some type of microaggression. And not just that, right? There's the people's biases and their own prejudices.
We're talking about oppression and the effects that it has on people's emotional well-being and how they show up in the workplace. So what you were talking about as far as the things that moms, black moms, might have to think about that their white counterparts don't have to think about. I'm just thinking about during this time in the pandemic, when all that was happening around racial injustice after George Floyd was murdered, right? Thinking about black people going to work. And for those who have children, thinking about like what's happening with their children who are being homeschooled right now. If they're not there to homeschool them, who's there to support them? But also thinking about, okay, now I have to show up in the workplace and keep on my face, my happy face, to seem like I'm here at work and I'm happy to be here, when really my people are being slaughtered in the street. And so that is something that we as people of color have to deal with emotionally that our white counterparts will never have to deal with. And so when we say, I don't see color, especially when white folks are saying that, what you're saying is that you are pretty much devaluing and discounting the experience of people of color. Because the fact is, you have the ability to be naive. We don't. So from very young, having to tell young black boys about what happens if you encounter the police. Who would think you would have to have that conversation with an 8-year-old, right? Because to the wrong officer, they can be viewed as a major threat, even though we see them as an 8-year-old child. So those types of pressures and things are really important to be thinking about. And at the same time, I think for us, that's why it's important to be speaking up in the workspace. I know that since all that has happened with George Floyd, a lot of companies have now been saying we're going to be doing work around race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So now is not the time for us to be silent, right? And to stick with safe. Now's the time for us to be having the conversations to help change the dynamic of what our workplaces look like so that we can make them supportive of who we are. And we will remain at the disadvantage.
Yes, it is all about being offered a seat at the table. We have to be at the decision-making table so that we can advocate for people that look like us who otherwise may not have the voice. And, you know, it takes me back to even thinking about building empires, talking about financial freedom. While it is nice to have a 9-to-5 as a system, as a people, we need to look at ways that we can also build empires. Not everyone is cut out to pursue entrepreneurship lifestyle. That lifestyle is very hard and is unique to certain group of people who are just adepts with the ability to endure the grind, hardship and the tenacity that's required for starting maybe your own business. And so as a community, we need to be looking internally at our skill sets, how we are wired, what can we do to also start a business, because nobody's going to just give you the opportunity. Sometimes we have to create the opportunity. We have to start building empire. We have to start building businesses so that, guess what? If you start a business, guess who's in charge? You are. You are in charge, right? You are in charge. And hopefully when you get there, then, like you said earlier, help bring other people up. But in the absence of building our own empires, if we cannot do that, because I recognize entrepreneurship is hard and it requires certain skill sets to do it. But if we have to take on 9-to-5 corporate jobs, it is very important that, like you said, at the very top of the food chain, most likely is a white person that is there. It is not typical that you see a black person at the top of the food chain. So if we must take 9-to-5 jobs, then it's very important that the hiring managers, you go into a human resources. When organizations are doing work efforts around diversity and inclusion, I'm always curious to look at your HR staff. I want to see your human resources staffing. How many of your human resource staff are people of color? You cannot be an organization preaching diversity and inclusion and have your hiring managers. There's the hiring managers who typically are the managers of a department or a director of a department. But before the application will even land at their table, right? There are people at the human resources who have to vet these applications. And if the people that are vetting the applications are all white people, you have a long way to go as an organization in building up your diversity. You just are. And if you think for a second that you don't, I'm sorry, you do. Because some people would come with their own biases and their own prejudices just by looking at even a name, right? Some name. You see some name and you just trash it. Or you see some name and then you look at it with an extra set of eyes because you are looking for maybe faults, reasons to deny these applications, reasons to not push the application forward to the hiring manager. So as far as, even building up this diversity, is one way I think tackling it is look at the human resource staffing.
Yes, I think that's huge. And I think also sometimes it means that as an agency, you may need to hire assistants. You may need to bring in and contract with an entity that really is prepared to help you make those changes. So why is our entire HR staff white? But we are saying that we are interested in race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So bringing in a consultant who can start to speak with staff and figure out what do the dynamics really look like. Because on your website, you're saying that you are this progressive company that's seeking this and that around equity, but maybe your staff are experiencing the agency in a very different way. And so having a consultant, preferably a consultant that has done this work for quite some time, and also that is composed of people of color and people of different walks of life. Because if you don't have that diversity in your company, you're going to need assistance in figuring out how do we now diversify. Because we don't just fire everyone and now bring in
Right.
people of color. No, right? That's not realistic. But how do we start strategically building in steps to now be able to change the source of our hiring, right? Because a lot of times what happens is people hire who they know.
Of course.
So you might find that someone is in a director role who is 22, fresh out of college, young white girl, no experience, but you have a woman who is working entry-level position and she has maybe 15 years, a black woman, under her belt, and she also has a college degree, But for some reason, she's in entry-level position. But now this young white girl gets to get into a director role. But why? Because she knew someone. And so a lot of times for our people, and this is why I love having these conversations, because a lot of times people feel like it has something to do with skill, ability. No, a lot of times it's opportunity. And what our people need, we don't need handouts or anything. We need opportunities, because folks who come from affluent communities, the difference is that they have access to opportunities from very early. Whereas for us, we know, you've heard it, you gotta work 4 times harder, you gotta be 4 times better, all these things. And it's true because it shows up in the workplace, right? So at my agency, we were having this conversation recently and looking at educational attainment amongst our staff members. And something we recognize, and like we are committed to this work, we've been doing this for over a year, something we recognize is that we have some folks who are very high up in the hierarchy who have maybe no college degree, who may have 1 associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, but then you have people of color who are in more junior roles and have just as much experience, but they have master's degrees, right? And so why is it that we have this disparity there? And it's because the system was put in place to ensure that the people who look like you will remain up top, right? So I'm gonna bring in people from my alma mater. I'm gonna, my neighbor's daughter is looking for, she just graduated and she's looking for an opportunity. I'm gonna bring her in. And so it has nothing to do really with skill and ability. A lot of times it's because of who folks know.
That is a great point. That truly, even just knowing how corporate America works, right? It's having resources in the community, in the people of color community, on educating the young ones that are coming up with how corporate America work. If you don't understand the people that you are working with, you don't understand how they are wired, how they are thinking, how can you compete? So even we talk about, growing up and having access, that who you know is really what sometimes propel your career. And quite frankly, it is true. Like you talk about classic example with the networking. Networking is not going around giving your cards. Maybe you don't even have a business card. But knowing that this individual have certain skill set that if I can build a relationship with that person, I can tap into their resources, I can tap into their network, and then they can help me propel my own career. So Nyesha, as we bring our conversation to an end, I want to talk about one more component of this whole emotional components of the effects that oppression and racism has on people. And it has to do with our fathers, our brothers, our uncles, the men in our community, our black men. When, the whole George Floyd thing came about, and even before George Floyd, it sounds like as a country, as a global world that we live in, there's much dialogue on race and equality and equity and all of that. But this thing had been happening for years, right? So when it comes to just the black men and their own emotional well-being, you have black men, especially if you are big and tall. I can't imagine as a man, having to suppress your own emotions, especially if you're a big, tall black man, you are seen as a threat. Have you ever thought about just what our black men are going through, especially when they are out in the streets, just so that, forget about even police, right? Forget about making sure that they don't get killed by a police, but just that they are not seen as a threat. The effect it has on their psyche.
For me, it's like even black boys, right? Because my brother is 18 now, but he has been big and tall his whole life, right? And so right now he's 18, he's 6'7", 300 pounds, right? So if you're talking about big, he's big.
Yeah.
But when he was 12, he wasn't 6'7", but he may have been almost 6 feet. And so while he has the mind of a child, and so he's gonna, how he goes out and he is in the world, he's gonna show up as a child, right? But someone seeing him and looking at only his size, looking at his skin color, now he can be perceived as a threat when really he's just a young boy doing what other young boys his age would be doing. And so thinking about the emotional stress that puts on the young child, because of course their parents have to tell them, like, listen, I understand that, you know, you want to be able to play in this way, you want to be able to go into these neighborhoods or do this and do that, but you have to be more vigilant than maybe your white friend down the street might have to be, because they don't have to think about the same things, unfortunately, in this world that you do. And thinking about, for us as Black women, what that also means for us, because we have brothers, uncles, fathers, and I know for me, especially during the George Floyd murder and the aftermath, the video that had been being shared and everything of his execution, really, it was something that I couldn't even watch, because number one, his name is George, and his size and the way that he looks. I have a cousin named George, and as soon as I saw just the visual, instantly I was like, that could have been my cousin George, that could have been my dad, that could have been my uncles, because they're all built the same. And so it's this extra layer of pressure and stress. You want to show up, you want to be able to be the best that you intend to be in your place of work, in your career, what you're passionate about. But really, you have these constant pressures and fears, and they are rooted in reality. You know, it's not like we're just being hyper vigilant. No, this is a reality. Like you said, it's been before George Floyd, right? So it was Tamir Rice, it was Trayvon Martin, you know, it was Michael Brown, it was all the people who came before, names that we don't even know, right? Because it was before our generation. And so it's this constant pressure. And so when we are expected to show up at work and expected to just go along and like everything is okay, I think this pandemic has really made it clear in most spaces that that's no longer possible. We can't separate the two anymore, because it used to be, once I cross the threshold of my job, I'm here. Now I have to put on my professional self. Back in 2015, the situation surrounding Sandra Bland's death made it very clear that, listen, this is something that Black women have to be concerned about too. And I know we see it now with Breonna Taylor and everything, and it's like, we all have this pressure that we have to think about. And I was speaking with my colleagues earlier this year, right before the pandemic, while we were doing this race, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I said, let's be clear. We work here at the same agency, but we live in two different worlds, right? When I leave this agency, I leave this building, I walk out into a completely different world than you walk into as my white counterpart. You get to walk freely and go home and have to be concerned about nothing. Whereas for me, I have to be thinking about, when I get in my car, if I get pulled over, what is that going to mean? Like, if it was just a taillight that was out, am I going to die because of it? Or am I going to leave the situation safe?
So, Nyesha, let's wrap up by talking about, you know, what resources is out there. How can we cope? Recognizing that it will take many years to fight against the injustice, to fight against the microaggression that we are dealt with. What are practical ways that as a community, as a society, as a country, as a world, we can do to help?
So I think because people will be watching this from all different places and areas in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., I think a lot of it, so there's an internal portion of it, right? So the things that we do inside and to care for ourselves, and then there's an external portion. When I'm thinking about internal, something that's really important for me is that, okay, if I'm starting work at 9, what am I doing before 9 to set the tone for my day, right? So I'm not listening to the news, because the news is going to be filled with a bunch of negativity, fear-mongering, things that are going to increase my anxiety. So instead, what can I be doing during that morning part of the day that can set the tone healthily for my day, right? So for me, that's journaling, that's meditating. You know, I'm a Jesus girl, so for me, that's doing my devotionals. Whatever that thing is for you, meditating, whatever helps to ground you, having your tea, but doing those things purposefully and intentionally at the beginning of your day, so that as you walk into your day and the world starts to pull on you at 9 a.m. and beyond, you've already put yourself in a place, a better space and place to be able to navigate those things. Because we know that we can't pour from an empty cup, right? So if you start your day out stressed out because you're feeding yourself all these things, I know people want to be informed, but really the way that the news is today, we're really being inundated and not informed, right? Because a lot of it's misinformation. And so I encourage people, especially during this time, to be careful about how much you're taking in. You want to stay informed, but be strategic about it. Maybe there's a specific time of the day that you're going to watch those things or read up on those things, because you want to ensure that you are creating space for yourself that is uplifting and not that is going to depress you really or put you in a place of despair. I think also connecting with a mentor. So we talked about therapy, we talked about having these conversations, but a mentor also. So someone who is further along than you are, especially if we're talking about career mobility. Starting to have conversations with people who look like you, who are being able to successfully navigate the system so that they can help you understand how you might be able to do it too, as you, not as them, but as you. I think that that's huge. And I know for me, mentors have been a huge, huge part of how I've been able to not only navigate and advance in my career, but how I've also been able to maintain my sanity. Because in being in spaces with them, I understand that it's not just me that encounters that. They have encountered it and continue to encounter it, but they've been able to build systems for themselves so that they may be able to do it sustainably.
Right. But I would also want to add that, young ones who may watch this video, when it comes to mentorship, it is a two-way street. And I don't know about you, Nyesha. While I was also blessed with mentors, I put in equal efforts in building that relationship. In my experience, the young ones that I have encountered in my experience are always waiting for their mentors to be the one to reach out. It doesn't work like that. They are mentors because they have competing priorities. They have a lot going on. So you, the mentee, have to really find time to insert yourself into their lives so they can carve out a time for you. So Nyesha, thank you so much for coming on the platform and engaging in this very hard, uncomfortable, but much needed conversation. I am hoping that our conversation would resonate with a lot of people. But for the most part, I hope that if you are a listener and you are not in the people of color group, that you receive this in good faith and recognize that we are not asking to be treated different. We are asking for compassion, for empathy, and for understanding. And to recognize that our world that we live in, Black people, the world that we live in, we are faced with a lot of challenges, whether it's blatant in our face, whether it's micro, whether it's hidden, that there's a lot that we go through that as a result really end up manifesting in a physical ailments that we see that we are disproportionately dealt with. And hence why you see a lot of statistics where Black people are at the forefronts. COVID is a prime example. If nothing came to taught us a lesson, COVID has really unveiled the truth about healthcare disparity and how marginalized communities have been affected in the worst way. So when you are listening to this conversation, I hope that you will dig deeper with your own circle of friends, internalize this conversation and ask yourself, did any of this conversation made you uncomfortable? And if it did made you uncomfortable in any way, then reach out to that Black friend of yours, that Black brother, sister, whoever, co-worker, colleagues of yours, and engage in a conversation. Tap into their experience and listen to them. Just listen. If you have nothing to do, listen and put yourself in their position and ask yourself, if you had to walk in their shoes and you have to live their experience, what effects do you think it will have on both your physical, your emotional, and even your career. Nyesha, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela. It has been my great pleasure. And listen, anytime you invite me back, I am happy to come back, right? I kind of feel like I'm a member of the Chat Over Popcorn family now. So you invite me back and I'll be here, because truly I feel like these conversations are so important, and really there's so much more than that. They are igniting and activating in people the things that have always been there, but that just needed some work to get it going. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. So guys, again, thank you for watching today's segments. I hope you find it very insightful. And like always, remember, our truths are best lived when we dare the moments. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for watching this episode. To continue with the conversation, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell or notification button to be notified every time new videos get uploaded. Also, click thumbs up to like the video and follow our Instagram and Facebook pages to catch up on all the conversations.